Hello and welcome back to the Whole Life podcast. My name's Grace Fielding.
And I'm Paul Woolley, and today we're talking about Christmas.
Well, hello everyone. It is so good to be with you again.
It is indeed, Grace, and it is almost Christmas. Are you excited?
Oh, of course. Love Christmas.
Do you, Grace, have any particular traditions that you're especially attached to?
Oh, what a good question. I think two come to mind. One is probably a bit more unusual than the other. So the first one is that growing up in my family, I don't know whether my parents were just a bit tight, but we were never given proper stockings for Christmas. So all of our stocking presents would come in a pillowcase.
Oh, dear.
Which at the time felt a bit hard done by, but actually I sort of grew to love it a bit to the extent that now I've sort of, grown up and am married, and for our first Christmas, we, had this conversation of do we have pillowcases or stockings? And I actually realized I was quite attached to the stocking idea. The pillowcase idea as a stocking. And the other one is that I always love to watch the good old classic Miracle on 34th Street on Christmas Eve. Just to, get into the new one, I have to say, because I know there is a much older version of the movie.
Yes.
But yeah, they're my two. How about you, Paul? Let us into your traditions.
Yeah,
Quirky.
all sorts. Christmas is so exciting, isn't it? Obviously, the worst Christmas film ever is Elf, which I think is just absolutely shocking. Should never have been made. We do always watch The Muppets Christmas Carol usually on Christmas Eve, and also Click and Collect. Do you know that little Christmas film?
No.
Well, it's worth watching that one. Have a look. I'll send you a link afterwards,
Please
Grace,
do,
so you
yeah.
can add it to your list. And of course, the reality is Christmas isn't Christmas, is it? Without Christmas cards, Christmas carols. I should say, by the way, that I think that electronic Christmas cards are appalling. And,
appalling. Wow, that's a strong word.
I don't think they're in the spirit of Christmas. But Christmas carols, you can't beat Christmas carols, can you? I mean, especially 9 Lessons and Carols from King's College, Cambridge on Christmas Eve, and Christmas cake and stockings. I'm a big fan of stockings too. In
Pillowcase or real stocking?
No, real stockings. Although if you're going to go for the pillowcase, you could go for the whole duvet cover, couldn't you?
Well, you do get more, I have to say. That is true, yeah. Which is
anyway, we digress, do we not, Grace? We are thinking today about Christmas. And why is Christmas the way it is? In other words, how do we get from the birth of Jesus to a big old man in a red suit, a Yule log, and an obsession with the John Lewis Christmas advert? In this episode, we want to think about the connection between the event of Christmas, in other words, the birth of Christ, and the celebration of Christmas. To what extent do we actually know the Christmas story? And to what extent are some of the things that we think we know about our Christmas traditions true or not? Who is our guest today, Grace? Who is going to help us with this? I hope it's Father Christmas, who, of course, as we know, is an invention of Coca-Cola. But tell us who it is.
Well, I'm afraid it's not Father Christmas, Paul, or Santa Claus, as he should actually be called. But it is someone who you could argue is even better, and that is Nick Page. Nick is prized for his skills as a writer, speaker, unlicensed historian, and in his own words, an applied ranter and general information monger. He's written over 70 books, including the Tabloid Bible, his Nearly Infallible History series, and Christmas, Tradition, Truth, and Total Baubles. He also co-presents the Mid-Faith Crisis podcast, which I believe your wife is a particular fan of, Paul. Is that right?
Oh, yes. Tell me about it. She is. I mean, obviously, there is no accounting for taste, is there? But nonetheless, Nick, you are very welcome. And actually, there are similarities between Nick and Father Christmas, I would say, in all sorts of ways. Nick, welcome to the Whole Life podcast.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you.
What an intro.
Yes, I'm not sure what the similarities are, apart from a beard. But his beard is better than mine, I think. Really.
Well, there's still time, isn't there?
No.
It's sort of you're a generous, spirited sort of person. I mean, you've agreed to come on this podcast. That's generous.
This is true. Yes. No. This is about the limits of my generosity, though. I think.
How are preparations for Christmas going in the Page household? Is there anything that is particular?
Well, much as normal. I have to say, in recent years, I was always a bit sort of grinchy about Christmas. I'll
I
be
can't believe
honest.
that.
I know. I think it was the sheer commercialism and everything. But I have to say, in recent years, I've really embraced my inner Santa Claus, as it were, my inner Father Christmas.
Well,
And
exactly. That's what I would
so
say.
we get our tree up really early these days, so it's up and it's glittering, and and we do similar traditions. Actually, Muppets Christmas Carol is our modern tradition. We always watch that. And my kids are all grown up now. You know, they're in their
Yes, of course.
20s, and so but we still watch Muppets Christmas Carol on Christmas Eve. I like the lessons and carols from Kings. You know, and a glass of sherry and a you know slice of fruit cake, and you're set, really, aren't you? Really. So yeah, preparations are fine. Looking forward to it.
Brilliant. What's there not to like? Nick, let's start with some facts about Christmas. So I have 3 facts for you about the Christmas story, that is. So the first fact is that Jesus was born in a stable on the
Mm,
25th of December, as we know.
mm.
Secondly, that Joseph was an old man. And thirdly, that 3 kings visited Jesus. Am I right or am I right?
Wrong on so many levels.
Okay,
I would say, I mean, the first one is 2 facts, isn't it? Anyway, stable
that's true.
and 25th of
Mm.
December. So you've snuck in an extra fact there. Um, Jesus was, we don't say, the Bible doesn't say Jesus was born in a stable. It says he was laid in a manger. And in first century peasant homes, the manger was actually inside the house. Similarly, the Bible never says anything actually about an inn. The word that Luke uses in his gospel is kataluma, a Greek word which means spare room. Actually, as much it can mean
Hmm.
inn, but not really. And later on in his gospel, Luke uses a different word for inn. So you think if he'd meant inn, if there were no room in the inn, he would have used that word. It's pandochion, I think it is. Anyway, so Catalum is spare room. So when we think about Jesus' birth, actually, I think we see it through the filter of Renaissance paintings largely, and for them, mangers, animal feeding troughs, were in stables. That's why Jesus is always in a stable. But in the first century peasant home, the manger was in the house. You brought the animals in at night to give you heat, and all the story indicates actually is that there was room for Jesus found in a peasant household. They made room for him, and it was crowded. There was no room in the spare room, and so they actually had to put him in down where the animals are, lay
Hmm.
him in a feeding trough. So that's the first one. Joseph being an old man, that comes from much later. That's a sort of it's bound up with some theology about Mary and all that kind of stuff, and about how Jesus didn't really have brothers. It's very complicated, but it comes from an apocryphal gospel. Um, Later on, Christians sort of felt that there was a gap in the gospels between Jesus' birth and growing up, so they filled them with some fan fiction, which there's one called the rather bizarre name of the Protevangelium of James, and that argues that Joseph was in fact a widower and had sons from a previous marriage, because we know in the Gospels Jesus has siblings, but actually the Gospels never say that. They just say Mary and Joseph were normal people really, and Joseph was probably a very young man and Mary a very young woman. So I think that's a later invention, this idea of Joseph as a widower, and I can't remember what the third one was. What was the third fact? Sorry.
The third one was around the 3 kings,
Yeah. Okay.
who obviously
Right.
brought gold, frankincense, myrrh. I mean, there's even speculation about the names of those kings, isn't there?
Yes. So the again, we read all this through the lens of what we've been told about it, not what it actually the Gospels say. So the Bible actually says magi. Doesn't say how many. Magi were not kings; they were sort of astrologers slash astronomers. They were scientists of their day in a way, and sort of magicians. We get the same word out of that. So we think there were 3 because, or we're told there were 3 because of the 3 gifts, but it doesn't say that. You know, there could have been 6, there could have been 2. It was more than one. Could have been 10. Might be very crowded. Who knows? And the names are a complete invention. They come from 7th century books, largely. I think the message of it is, though, that they were foreigners. They were sort of not of the sort of official classes. All the people who are invited, actually, as it were, into the Christmas story are sort of marginal people. Shepherds were viewed as outcasts, and these magi. So they're not part of the official apparatus, and yet somehow they get included in this story.
It's so
Yeah, so
interesting,
most
isn't
of it
it?
is added on stuff. It's all bolted on later.
Yeah, I mean, it does require us then to rethink nativity plays, doesn't it? And although I think
Yes.
often, particularly in schools, teachers often are looking for more than three wise men anyway, so
We
that's
need more
helpful.
characters, not less.
Yeah, well, I think for 2,000 years, innkeepers have had terrible PR. They've basically been seen as people who are grumpy people. And you always give the innkeeper to the slightly truculent child in the class, don't you? So you can say, "Go away,"
Yeah.
but no, there's no evidence that in the original retelling and the original telling of the story that Mary and Joseph were turned away from anywhere.
I mean, it's more satisfying the way you describe it, in the
Mm.
sense that suddenly the account is that there was no room for Jesus in the spare room, so they found room within the
Hmm.
house somewhere else. In a way, they were hospitable, they were accommodating him. And then also, as you described, the scenes of, Joseph knocking on all these doors, all these hotels, and being turned away. That just sort of, that doesn't seem part of the story. I am a bit disappointed about the names of the wise men, though. I mean, not that they are in the Bible, but they're fine. We used to have a cockerel called Balthazar. Until a fox got him, and he was very fine. And I often think of those wise men in that way.
Well, what they did with the Magi later on was they turned them into symbols, as it were. So you get them from different parts of the world. You get different nations, and you get different ages. So one's always shown as very young, and then you get a middle aged one, and an old one, and so they get given these sort of characteristics. I think to show what you're saying, that actually the story in the Gospels is a story of inclusion, not exclusion.
Mm.
I don't like the way that the Christmas story has been turned into this thing about people behaving badly towards Jesus. Actually, it's people finding room for him,
Yeah,
making space in the heart of a peasant household. That's the story of Christmas. It's about Jesus coming for everybody,
yeah.
and space being made for him.
Yeah. And I think that word kataluma, I think, if I'm right, it appears again, but then at the end of Luke's gospel, when Jesus is in the upper room with his
Yes.
disciples, and there is room for them all in the room, as it were. And then, am I right in saying that the only other time that Luke uses the word inn, I think, is in the parable of the Good Samaritan,
It is, yes.
when he was taken to an inn. So again, suddenly
Yeah.
that reframes everything, and I think it becomes more interesting, not less interesting, more life giving. Okay, well, let's shift now from the Christmas story to the festival of Christmas, the celebration of Christmas. That originally started off life as a Roman festival, didn't it? What that the church then took on and then kind of reordered, reapplied.
It feels like you're trolling me, to be honest. Here, it feels like you're just giving me facts to wind me up. So
There are plenty more, don't worry.
this is we've known each other for so long. You've never been like this before. Anyway, this is what you hear at Christmas. At Christmas, these tired old sort of myths get trotted out, and one is that Christians decided to place Christmas on 25th of December because that was the Roman festival of the sun. And so they sort of park their tanks on the lawn of a Roman festival. Actually, when you really dig into it, this is simply not supportable. So, for a start, yes, Christmas was not a major festival for the early church. It doesn't really start getting celebrated until the 4th century, until the sort of 350s, really. Um, but the Roman festival story comes from later. So the first mention we have of Christmas, of 25th of December being the date of Jesus' birth, comes from a document called the Philocalian Calendar, which was a document written in Rome 353 AD, around that time, and that says 25th of December was Jesus' birth. Now, the first mention we have of the Roman festival of the unconquered sun being on 25th of December comes from a document called the Philocalian Calendar, written 353 AD. It's the same document. It's actually
Interesting.
so. Firstly, there's no evidence of a Roman festival of the unconquered sun any time before that. So it's the same time. Secondly, actually, the date of the Christmas thing comes from an older portion of the Philocalian calendar, a portion based on older data. So there's more evidence, in fact, that the Romans parked a festival on the Christians' festival, not the other way around. At the end of the day, it's not that important. Yes, we don't know exactly when Jesus was born, and it was actually very unlikely to be in December, according to the gospel stories, because sheep were still in the fields, they wouldn't be at that time. But it doesn't matter. They had to put it somewhere, and they decided that was the date for some theological reasons that I don't really want to go into here. But I would say just that there's absolutely no evidence that the Roman festival of the sun predated the Christian festival at all. It's more likely it came after it, actually.
So interesting.
You'll be delighted to hear, Nick, that I've got some more facts to
Good.
sense check. But rather than, obviously Paul's been just sort of giving them to you, assuming they're correct. I'm going to do it as more of a genuine question.
Okay.
So in his intro, as I say, Paul made several claims about things associated with Christmas. And you mentioned about your Christmas tree that you put up very early, which is actually very different to my family. My mum insisted that we used to put up sort of as late in the day as possible, which used to, as children, drive us crazy when all of our friends have got these beautiful Christmas trees and our house still looks the same as usual up until about, well, the very earliest, the 20th of December. Anyway, I digress now. Is it not the case that the Christmas tree was brought to us by Prince Albert, and also that the hanging of mistletoe, are they completely of pagan origin, those traditions?
No, short
There we
answer.
go.
So the Christmas tree, the first evidence we have of Christmas trees is probably from the 1400s,
Okay.
where they were very popular in sort of North Germany and Latvia and those kinds of areas, the sort of Northern Europe kind of bits. They were first popularized. The first mention of them, it probably comes from an account which talks of a German, a guild of German merchants called the Brotherhood of the Blackhead, which
Okay.
is really not a very good name, frankly, for a guild. I think they're all bachelors as well. You can understand why,
Yeah,
really.
true.
I mean, for heaven's sake, moisturise people. And so they put a Christmas tree up in Riga, I think it was. Um, in Germany, they were very popular. Probably they arise out of Christian plays that were performed around the time, because
Okay.
Christians performed what we call mystery plays, which are sort of biblical plays. And one of the most popular ones was the Adam and Eve story, which was traditionally performed on Christmas Eve, and of course revolves around a tree. And so there was this tree, this paradise tree they called it, and they would be on wheels, and so they would parade them around. And so one of the theories is that the paradise tree had fruit hanging off it and all kinds of goodies, and that becomes a sort of Christmas tree that's there. Mistletoe and
Wow.
greenery
Okay.
is well, mistletoe. We first mention of it comes from about 18th century in terms of its connection with Christmas. And I don't think it's got anything to do with paganism. It's got to do with a very ancient human tradition of wanting to kiss people, notably
Yeah.
men wanting to kiss women in a socially appropriate way, and probably an inappropriate way, judging by many office parties. But it's mentioned in, I think, about in the mid 1700s, really, as a tradition that's coming in. Um,
Mm.
the thing is, people see these words and they become like trigger words to associate with other things. So the minute people see mistletoe, they think druids, because one of the few things we know about druids is that they cut down mistletoe.
Mm.
But actually, we don't even know that for sure very much. We have very little account of druidism. We know virtually nothing of paganism, of ancient paganism in this country. So every kind of time people say, "Oh, well, it's an ancient pagan tradition," pretty much it's not. They're just making it up.
Mm.
You know.
Interesting.
And I think there's a thing that I talk about in the book. If it looks pagan, it must be pagan. and often a lot of greenery, forests, all this kind of stuff is associated with paganism. But actually, greenery was how you decorated your house. And so
Mm,
churches were decorated with greenery, not because they were sort of, replicating pagan myths, but because actually that's how you made the church look nice.
mm,
You didn't have solar powered lights. You didn't have anything like that. You had greenery. So you brought in different greenery at different time of the year. And again, that's been something that's gone back probably to about the sort of 12th, 13th century in terms of churches. But it's not a pagan tradition; it's a human tradition to bring flowers and greenery into your house. It's nothing
yeah.
to do with pagans or
I like
Christians.
that tradition. I think we should sometimes opt for more of the kind of the greenery rather
Oh
than
yeah,
the
yeah,
multicolored lights and tinsel. I feel like sometimes a bit of greenery could bring a bit of taste, in my opinion, back to
yeah. Because the
Christmas.
symbolism is important. Don't forget, Christmas is a midwinter festival,
Yeah.
and so it is linked with equinoxes and sort of the heart of winter, and so we want it to be about life.
Mm,
So
mm,
I think that's one of the reasons why the Christians did place it actually in 25th of December or mid-December, but it's because it's a story that gives us hope in the middle of winter.
yeah. Yeah.
So greenery is part of that. Bring some
Yeah.
life into your house.
Oh, I love that. The other thing that people might have heard when it comes to Christmas in the past is that Oliver Cromwell banned Christmas at
Hmm.
one point. Could you speak to that a bit?
Well, so the Puritans didn't like Christmas because it's got the word mass in it, so they weren't very keen on that. And because it's not actually in the Bible in terms of a celebration, it's not a festival that's there, so they didn't really like that. Um, And they did ban it, although it was the Scottish Puritans who banned it first. Actually, it wasn't the English Parliament; it was the Scottish who did it. Um, I think Cromwell gets blamed but I don't think he wanted it particularly. I don't think he wanted Christmas, but he actually wasn't in Parliament when it was banned. He wasn't there, so he didn't do much to reinstate it. And in fact, they were always on a losing cause. They made some mistakes basically, the Puritans, because they wanted to keep Christmas like every other day. So one of the things they did was keep the pubs open. Well, I mean, that's not going to help, is it? Really, that's if you want people to sort of not enjoy themselves, then don't keep the pubs open. But they always complained. They wanted the shops to be opened, but frankly, they were always on a losing battle because people always found a way to get round it, and they wanted to celebrate it really.
Mm,
So I
mm.
don't think Oliver Cromwell was a fan, but nor is he entirely to blame.
Yeah, yeah. The other one that I have in my mind is this whole idea of, the association with Coca-Cola
Mm,
and Christmas
mm.
and this idea that Coca-Cola invented what we now know as the sort of the modern Santa Claus. What would you say to that one?
Well, it's a nice PR spin for Coca-Cola,
Yeah,
isn't it?
very true.
But it's not true. Um, I think there's the history of Santa Claus and Father Christmas is really interesting. Well, I think it's interesting, but I would. They're actually two separate figures. So Father Christmas is the sort of British version,
Hmm.
Sir Noel, and he appears very early. And there's a Puritan um, pamphlet, which is an anti-Puritan pamphlet, I should say, which is about the Puritans trying to imprison Father Christmas, who's described as an old, very old man, but he somehow escapes the whole time. And so our tradition is more, I mean, in Dickens' terms, Dickens has our sort of Father Christmas in the Ghost of Christmas Present is very much that figure, the big
Yeah.
bacchanalian figure. Um, Santa Claus is, of course, Saint Nicholas,
Mm.
whose origins are pretty murky, but was probably a bishop of a church in Myra, which is in Turkey now, and probably martyred. And in fact, actually, we have the bones of Saint Nicholas were basically they were taken into safekeeping by some Italians, i.e., stolen and taken to I can't remember which Italian city they were taken to, but they were taken to an Italian city, and they did some analysis of them, and they all conform to the idea of a fourth century man with a broken nose. Funnily enough, so if you see a
Mm.
Father Christmas who doesn't, or Santa Claus who doesn't actually have a broken nose, that is inaccurate.
There we go. That's the way people can tell
And
now.
then later on, he became a very popular saint with sailors, and so all around the world, chapels of St Nicholas were established. Every time a sailor got safely to port, they wanted to say thank you, and so they established a church or a chapel of St Nicholas, and so it becomes very popular. Gets taken to America, blah blah blah, and becomes this Saint Nick figure. And the red stuff, the red clothing, is really added to him in illustrations on magazines from about sort of 1850-ish onwards, but probably 1860, 70 actually. When colour magazines came in, they had to decide, well, what colour we're going to do him. So they gave him green to start with, but I think it then went red as it was a more eye-catching colour. So it predates the Coca-Cola thing by what, 70 years, 60
Yeah,
years.
they've just stolen it.
Well, I don't think, to be fair to Coca-Cola, they've ever claimed it, but nor have they denied it. And so I think they're quite happy to keep the association.
Yeah, absolutely. We've you've touched on a couple of times this whole idea of, sort of PR pieces that come in at Christmas. And I think also you mentioned sort of in years gone by, there was this idea of wanting to stop people from, going out and shopping and things, but people would always find a way. What are your thoughts on the kind of, I think we can probably all agree that there is a kind of level of commercialism which has gone, slightly through the roof and a bit crazy. But would you say that you think some of that commercialism is killing Christmas? Or obviously, there are various different views on it. Some people go, crazy and love all the bells and whistles. But yeah, what are your thoughts on the kind of the commercial aspect of Christmas that we see nowadays?
Well, something is always killing Christmas. I'm no fan of the sort of crass and huge commercialism that's come in, and I think it puts enormous pressure on people. And the problem is not gift giving. I think the problem is going into debt in order to keep up with others, and how we've done that, and the social pressures on people to conform to a certain image of Christmas. So I think there's an argument to say commercialism sort of kept Christmas alive, really, and kept and is responsible for it. Dickens really repopularized it, and then it became more commercial after that. I don't think commercialism is killing Christmas, because I think Christmas is part of the Christian tradition, which is always about rebirth. There's a wonderful Chesterton story I think it's called The Shop of Ghosts, where a man goes into a toy shop and he sees this owner who's this great old man with big white hair and everything, and he looks very down, and he asks for a toy, and the owner just gives him this toy, and he says, I always give it away. And he says, I think I'm dying. I think I'm dying, the owner says. And then all these people come in from the past, Dickens and Richard Steele and all these characters who've written about Christmas before. And they always go, no, you're not dying. You've always been dying, and yet you're always here. You're always back. You'll carry on. You'll be fine. And I think that's the thing. I think there will always be threats to Christmas. I work part of my time for an organisation called Open Doors, which supports persecuted Christians around the world. And, the threat to Christmas there is to be seen to be celebrating it. There's no way that Christians in certain parts of the world, North Korea or, Saudi Arabia or those kinds of places, can be really seen visibly to be celebrating it. And yet it still survives, still celebrated, because it's about rebirth. It's about new life. And I don't think you can ever get rid of that. Puritans tried, and commercialism is supposedly killing Christmas, but you can't kill it.
So
optimistic
interesting.
answer, yeah.
So interesting listening to you, Nick. I'm reluctant to give up my Dickens Christmas. I love Dickens and A Christmas Carol, but I do want to have an authentic Christmas. And I suppose I'd be interested in knowing what you think in terms of how the Christmas story can or should shape our celebration of Christmas, our Christmas traditions. What would a truly biblical Christmas look like? Is that? I think that's a desirable thing, but what would that look like? How do you see potentially the link between those two things, the Christmas story and then our celebration of it?
Well, we should point out that obviously only two of the Gospels give the nativity story, and both have different aspects and different sort of variants. So I think in terms of the early church, it wasn't an important thing. Ancient societies weren't too worried, in fact, about when you were born or how you were born. It was much more later on how you lived and how you died. I think from our point of view, I think we should adopt those principles. How you do Christmas is up to you, because virtually everything about Christmas has been invented. It's an invented festival, and everything has been added onto it. So how you do it is up to you. But maybe that thing about inclusion and new life, those two themes, are worth thinking about. I think Christmas is about hope. It's at the darkest time of the year, and so I think look ahead and look with hope, and bring signs of life into your house, and don't despair. There is hope coming into the world. There's always hope coming into the world. And the other thing is about inclusion. Invite people in, gather up the people who are haven't got anywhere to go. Be hospitable. I do think partly in our society we might have lost this a little bit in our neighborhoods. I'm not sure. Maybe it's a post-COVID thing or something like that. But I think this is an opportunity to open our houses, especially if you live in an old pub like I do. Open your house up and enjoy people's company and find out about people and invite people in. And enjoy it. What's wrong with good food and good drink and relishing the great parts of life? Make space for other people. Make space for Jesus in the heart of your house.
Yeah, that's great. What do you think we are in danger of missing in the Christmas story? So we talked at the beginning about those aspects that we think are in the Christmas story but aren't. But what about those things that are in the Christmas story? And maybe you've just talked about that just now in terms of who Jesus is and what his challenge and invitation is to the world. But what are the elements of the Christmas story that you think we need to recover and could build into our traditions?
Well, I think there's a grittiness to it, actually, that we don't get. There's a lot about the story, about the scandal of Jesus' birth. And one of the reasons, I think, why Mary and Joseph go south, as it were, to Bethlehem is because it's a scandalous event. Joseph could have divorced Mary but chose not to, or not. He hadn't been married, but he could have chosen not to marry her. So I think Christmas has demands on us. The story of Jesus' arrival is both full of hope and full of joy and full of life, but it's also demanding to some extent, because the question is, how do you respond to this? We miss out, I think, on the threat that Christmas is to established orders. Part of the Christmas story comes later, when Herod sends troops to slaughter the children, to wipe out any evidence of a ruler coming in. So the Christmas story is about someone arriving who is going to have some claims on your life, if you take that seriously, who's going to upset the established order. In its appeal, in the people who appear in it, the shepherds and the magi, they're outsiders. So it's already upsetting the established order. It's all wrong in many cases. The new prince arrives in the wrong place, to the wrong type of people. And so I think there's a real radical challenge there to us about the story itself. So I think what we miss is we don't really read it properly. We we see it, as I said earlier, but through the lens of sort of those the posher Christmas cards that you get, from your posher relatives who send you the ones from the galleries. Those cards. We see it through those lens. We don't see it for the gritty, real, challenging event that it was.
Yeah,
It
it's
has all
interesting,
those
isn't it?
things.
And that whole emphasis on this is good news and it's good news for the world, and the shepherds are told not to be afraid because of this good news. At the same time, that isn't actually good news for everyone, because the claims of Jesus and the identity of Jesus is going to be a threat to others. So if Jesus is king and has absolute power, then Herod isn't and
Yes,
doesn't, and he's not
exactly.
going to like that.
No.
So that's interesting.
And the good news thing is I think interesting, because, as you say, that the angelic choir that appears to the shepherds and says, we have good news for you. You'll find a baby wrapped in swaddling clothes and lying in a manger. Everybody thinks, oh, that's a way of identifying the child. That's how they'll know, and he should be a sign for you. So that they think, oh, that's the sign. That's how we identify him. I don't think that's what's happening here, because Bethlehem wasn't that big. It wouldn't have been too hard to find a newborn baby. All babies were wrapped in swaddling clothes. Yes, the manger is a bit unusual, but they're probably not that unusual. The sign for them is that he's like them. The sign for them is you'll find him. He's exactly like all of you. He's one of you, and that's very challenging, because there are all kinds of powers who don't want any saviors to be like us. They don't want to appeal to us, to ordinary people. They want to package it and keep it safe and defuse it. But no, the shepherds are told, you're not outside the kingdom. You're in it. He's just like you.
Yeah, maybe the thing then that we need to rediscover, without wanting to put words in your mouth, of course, is the incarnation of Christmas. That take that really seriously, that God in the person of Jesus Christ does become flesh and blood and is like us, and that is outrageous. And also, although that can be encouraging because it affirms something about our humanity, also it's troubling as well, because it kind of raises all sorts of other questions.
Oh, it does, yes. And incarnation is, of course, at the heart of Christmas. The becoming flesh, and of course, the church over the centuries has been sort of baffled and mystified and argued with each other about what that means, and how is this possible? I think sometimes you just have to park that. Well, most of the time, frankly, you just have to park there, because you don't really know how it's possible. What it means is that flesh is not sinful. Humanity is not sinful innately in and of itself. It's inhabitable by God. This is the thing, and God became one of us. It's tremendous. It's amazing, and one of us in a peasant household, an ordinary one of us, not an aloof one of us. Living an obscure life to some extent, but I think that's amazing, and that's exactly right. How do we incarnate God? How do we incarnate Jesus in our Christmas celebrations? How do we make him present? He's always present, but how do we make that reality of his presence visible?
I love that, Nick. It's been so good speaking to you, and just hearing your perspective on Christmas, but also being able to kind of dig a bit deeper into some of the assumptions that we've probably made and the things that we might have missed. I have one final question for you, which of course is the most important. Is that, what is your favourite Christmas snack, or what's the item of food that you feel like when it comes to Christmas, that is the thing that you're looking forward to?
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, I'm a mince pie addict.
Are you addict? Well, that's strong.
I really like mince pies. I object to Christmas food and Christmas provisions coming into the shops in September. I object vociferously to that, except for mince pies, because mince pies can come in at any time they like, as far as I'm concerned.
Do you have a specific brand that you? This is not an ad, but do you have a specific brand that you like?
I know, but I do. I'm quite a big fan of all these recent innovations. Although I do like a good traditional ones. Okay. Yeah. No, I think you should balance them up though, with always going traditional with it.
Yeah, we could do like a 3-course meal with these days, couldn't you? With mince pies.
Yeah, you get Heston Blumenthal goes a bit crazy at Christmas if you go into Waitrose, which you do at Christmas because you push the boat out.
Of
but
course.
No, I think I read all those articles at Christmas about who's doing the best mince pies, and I try them all out. It's
nice.
Well worth doing.
Well, and it sounds like from what you've said today, people should invite their friends over, have a mince pie party, and I loved what you were saying about like welcoming and making space in your home for Jesus with others, and what better way to do that than with an array of mince pies to try.
Absolutely. It's great.
Nick, thank you so much for joining us. It's been really good to talk to you. What are you working on at the moment, and how can people keep track of what you're up to if they'd like to?
Well, I do the podcast, which, as you said, is called Mid-Faith Crisis, and you can find that at midfaithcrisis.org. I work a bit, as I said, with Open Doors, so you can find out about them at opendoorsuk.org. And I'm writing a book about churches, old churches at the moment,
Oh wow.
about the history of how we got churches, why people built them, and more importantly, what they mean for us today, what
Mm.
the significance is for us today. I have to say, I've been writing this book for about 3 years, and it's going very slowly because it's also fascinating, and there's
Yeah.
so many myths to dispel.
Sign of good stuff. I feel like when it's taking a while. Well, we look forward to. I won't ask you when it's due to be finished, but we look forward to it whenever it will be.
Thank you. Yeah, I look forward to finishing it one day.
Absolutely.
Future Christmas present.
Exactly. Yeah, there we go. Well, yeah, Nick, thank you so much. And we hope that you and your family have a wonderful Christmas and a peaceful New Year too.
Thank you very much, and the same to you both.
Happy
Thanks. Take care,
Christmas,
Nick.
Nick. Thanks so much. Grace, what did you think? How did you find that?
I really enjoyed that. I think Nick was, firstly, a brilliant communicator. I feel like he had a really lovely balance of, giving us some real facts, giving us some history, giving us some context, but also just doing it in a very fun, accessible way. Um, and yeah, I think the two things which I think he actually summarized himself actually at the end of the podcast was about this idea of, Christmas being a time of inclusion and of rebirth. And I suppose I'd never really thought about it in those terms before. And I was particularly struck when he was talking about the kind of Christmas story from when we, that we read in the Bible and how we've sort of added things to it, especially about this idea of actually, um, Mary and Joseph being turned away from the inn. And actually, I think, and he spoke about this idea of we've almost created this narrative where the Christmas story is about people behaving badly towards Jesus, when actually it's about people that made space for Jesus and people that were on potentially the fringes of society. And this whole idea of he basically says Jesus being welcomed into a peasant household, and I really love that framing of it, and I think it was a really good example to us actually of he then followed on, didn't he, to talk about this idea of making space in our homes and in our hearts as well. And I think that's personally is something I always come back to at Advent, of this idea of life is busy, our minds are cluttered, our world is cluttered, but actually just being able to make space, um, for Jesus at a time that is all about him. And I thought that, just that link between how we see that in the story, how that's what we're doing in our hearts, but also that's what we can do in our homes. And I love that he clearly loves Christmas and does now, and wants it to be a time of, um, enjoyment and spending time with people that we love and opening up our home. And I just thought that thread between, seeing that's what we see in the Christmas story in the Bible through to, perhaps how we might want to celebrate Christmas Day. And it definitely challenged me as well of, I know that sometimes Christmas can be a time where we can think very much about our, as we spoke about, our own traditions or what we do with our family. And actually that idea of thinking, oh, well, who in my circle or on the fringe of my circle, who can I include that might not otherwise feel included? So yeah, as much as it was good fun, I thought there were also some really profound
Yeah.
bits there as well. How about you, Paul? Have you recovered from from the fun that
Yes. Well, I
you're a
think
good
you're right.
sport?
I think you're right, Grace, that Christmas is about family. It's just the family's that much bigger, isn't it, than often
Yes.
we think or maybe are willing to accept. And that's a challenge. I thought his whole bit on ancient pagan traditions and his sort of
Mm,
demythologization of that was really interesting. And the fact that we know really nothing about paganism. And I think that's something that's often not understood, and it's helpful to hear that and really interesting. I thought that I learned such a lot, so that I didn't know that there was a sort of difference between Father Christmas, i.e., the British version, and Santa Claus.
mm,
And so that's interesting. The fact they were two quite distinct, different characters. Um, and something, I mean, particularly towards the end, as he was talking about what I suppose really is the scandal of Christmas, and then the challenge to respond to that and think, how do we incarnate God,
mm.
incarnate Christ into our celebration of Christmas, which then takes us back to your first point. I think that was that was really interesting and helpful, and the fact that we can so easily lose sight of some of the grittiness, some of the earthiness.
Yeah.
But that if Christmas is anything, I mean, that's a terrible phrase, but you know what I mean. It is about the earthiness, about the fact that this material world matters. That it
Mm,
matters so much that God comes in the person of Jesus Christ. And then you know, the way that he talked about the angels to the shepherds, and the fact that Jesus, you know, the shock and the sign is that Jesus is one of them. You know, the scandal is that Jesus
yeah.
is so like them. And that kind of causes discomfort, but it also causes great joy, and therefore it's good news for the world, except for people like Herod, who have got want to
True.
cling on to their own power
Yeah.
and their own status and their own claims and everything. So it'd be interesting. I mean, it'll be interesting. I have to talk with you. Well, perhaps not Boxing Day. Leave a few days, grace. But in terms of the extent to which this conversation then
Yeah. Shapes.
reframes the way we do Christmas,
Yeah.
and you know, in the next few days, you know, what will there anything be different? Will we change anything now?
If you've not sent them out already, do you feel like your Christmas cards need to be? Because I feel like you know, the what did he say that there was
It's a bit
the
late.
the
It's a bit
pot the
late.
pot well you're clearly much more organised than I am, Paul, but I just was very aware that you felt very strongly about, you know, the type of Christmas card that felt appropriate. But then actually what Nick was saying was that, you know, not saying that yours are posh at all, Paul, but that the posh Christmas cards are
Watch the tape.
perhaps not, you know, gritty enough, or not actually expressing that sense of that, as you say, that kind of earthiness, realness, messiness, that actually we see in some parts of the Christmas story. So I'll leave that with you for next year, and I look forward to getting a gritty
Well, you
digital Christmas card from
can
you.
take a look at this year's first, obviously, Grace. But the I think that's a fair. I think I have quite strong. I mean, I know this will surprise you, but quite strong views about Christmas cards. And well, I put it this way: I always try to find something that communicates something of the
Yes,
Christmas
not
story.
Rudolph the reindeer.
And yeah, sort of avoid, you know, the Boxing Day hunt sort of type thing.
Yes, yeah,
I mean, as not, I mean, as it happens as an event, but also as a Christmas card. But it's interesting. I mean, there is something interesting there, isn't there? About, you know, there is something. I don't know. This is just such a going down a complete blind alley here, Grace. But something about, you know, is a digital Christmas card a less authentically Christmas thing than an actual Christmas card, given the significance of the incarnation? I mean, there's a thought.
wow,
What do you think?
wow.
I don't know.
I think I need some time to think about that one, Paul.
You
But
go
I
and have
think,
another cherry,
yeah,
Grace.
absolutely. But that, yeah, I mean, well, let us know what you think, everyone. That's really going to spark a bit. Maybe we do need to do like a sort of, you know, a following Christmas chat, so we can ponder some of these things and hear about how yeah, how we've put into practice or shaped our Christmases according to our conversation. But anyway, if you have enjoyed this episode of The Whole Life, we'd love you to follow us, leave a review, and tell your friends about it. But until next time, from Paul and I, that was The Whole Life. Goodbye, everyone, and we hope that you have a wonderful Christmas and that you will join us again in the new year. Bye, everyone.
Yes. Happy Christmas, everyone, and have a very peaceful new year. And you too, Grace.
Yes, you too, Paul.